Hi Libra, okay. This reading feels a lot deeper than it looks on the surface, because the energy I'm picking up on isn't really about someone forgetting you. It's about someone realizing what your presence meant, after it was no longer being handed to them so freely. And honestly, I feel like that's where the shift began. There is somebody here who has very real feelings for you. I don't think that's the issue. The issue is that this person got comfortable. Comfortable knowing you cared. Comfortable knowing you would understand. Comfortable knowing you would be there. But something changed. Maybe you stopped reaching out. Maybe you stopped trying to hold everything together. Maybe you simply got tired of carrying the emotional weight by yourself. And ever since that happened, this person hasn't felt quite the same. They may not be showing everything on the outside, but underneath the surface, there's a lot happening here. Because the silence they once thought they could handle is starting to sound a lot louder than they expected. And the more space you create, the more they're being forced to sit with feelings they've been avoiding for a very long time. Honestly, Libra, this feels like a turning point. Not because you're chasing them, but because you're not. And for the first time, they're beginning to understand the difference. Let's take a look at what the cards want to reveal. Okay, so the first card coming through is the Four of Pentacles. And honestly, Libra, this energy feels very different from what this person expected. Because for a long time, they were comfortable. Not necessarily because they didn't care about you, but because they got used to your presence. They got used to knowing that if they pulled away, you would still be there. If they became distant, you would try to understand. If they became quiet, you would find a way to keep the connection alive. And I don't think they fully realized how much emotional space you were holding for them. But something shifted. You stopped carrying what wasn't yours. You stopped trying to fix what they weren't willing to face. And for some of you, it wasn't even dramatic. There wasn't a big argument or some explosive ending. You simply became quieter. You started putting your energy somewhere else. You started protecting your peace. And that's when this person began feeling something they hadn't felt before. The absence. Because what I'm seeing here is somebody who thought things would stay exactly the way they were. Somebody who believed there would always be another chance to reach out later, another chance to explain, another chance to make things right. But the moment your energy changed, their sense of certainty changed too. And now the Nine of Swords is showing up. Honestly, I don't think they're talking about this with many people. This feels incredibly private. The kind of thoughts that show up when everything gets quiet. The kind of thoughts that appear at 2 in the morning when there are no distractions left. Because the energy I'm picking up on is somebody replaying things, conversations, choices, moments they brushed aside, moments they thought would always be available to revisit. And suddenly they're seeing them differently. You know, sometimes people don't recognize the value of emotional safety until it's no longer surrounding them. And Libra, I feel like you provided a level of understanding that this person didn't fully appreciate at the time. Not because they were a bad person, not because they wanted to hurt you, but because human beings often notice consistency only after it's gone. This person became accustomed to your patience. They became accustomed to your kindness. They became accustomed to your ability to see the good in them, even during moments when they struggled to see it themselves. And now there's this strange emptiness around them, because the support they quietly relied on doesn't feel as accessible anymore. The intention once took for granted isn't showing up in the same way. The emotional reassurance they unconsciously leaned on isn't there like it used to be. And honestly, that's creating a lot of reflection. Then I see justice. And the moment this card appears, everything becomes very still. Because this isn't about punishment. This isn't about revenge. This feels more like realization, like life holding up a mirror. And for the first time, this person is beginning to see the connection from your side. They're beginning to recognize how much effort you invested. How many times you gave grace? How many times you chose understanding over conflict? How many times you kept the door open when most people would have walked away? And I think that's what's affecting them the most. Not anger, not blame, awareness. Because awareness has a way of changing everything. Once somebody truly sees what they've been receiving, they can no longer pretend they didn't notice. And I feel like this person is reaching that point. They're beginning to understand that your presence wasn't something ordinary. It wasn't something guaranteed. It was something valuable, something meaningful, something that quietly became part of their emotional world. And now they're sitting with the possibility that they may have come much closer to losing it than they ever realized. Honestly, Libra, that's where this energy starts becoming very interesting. Because what they're feeling now goes much deeper than simple regret. It feels like the beginning of a much larger internal conversation that they can no longer avoid. because once somebody starts asking themselves difficult questions, it's very hard to go back to pretending everything is fine. And that's exactly where I feel this person is right now. The Hermit is coming through, and honestly, Libra, this doesn't feel like somebody who suddenly has all the answers. It feels like somebody who has finally stopped running from the questions. There's a difference, because for a long time, I think this person stayed busy with responsibilities, busy with distractions, busy with other people, busy convincing themselves that certain emotions could simply be ignored. But lately, the energy feels much quieter, almost like life has been creating little pockets of solitude around them. Moments where there's nobody else to listen to, nobody else to blame, nobody else to distract them from what they're feeling. And in those quiet moments, you keep showing up. Not necessarily through communication, not necessarily through direct contact, but through memory, through reflection, through realization. You know, it's interesting because sometimes people think growth happens when something new enters their life. But what I'm seeing here feels different. This feels like growth happening because somebody can no longer avoid what was already there. And I feel like that's why the Hermit keeps pulling this person inward. Because there are parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. Old fears, old disappointments, old wounds connected to trust, connected to vulnerability, connected to feeling like if they fully opened their heart, they might lose control, and somehow your connection seems to touch every one of those places. Not because you tried to, not because you intentionally triggered them, but because something about your presence naturally exposed what was hidden beneath the surface. Okay, and now judgment is appearing, and wow, this energy feels powerful, because I'm getting this sense of somebody replaying their own choices, looking back at situations from an entirely different perspective, not through ego, not through pride, but through honesty. And honesty can be uncomfortable, especially when somebody realizes that certain opportunities were never as guaranteed as they assumed. I feel like this person is beginning to recognize patterns in how they've handled relationships, patterns in how they've responded when emotions became too intense, patterns in how they've protected themselves, because sometimes protection can look a lot like avoidance. Sometimes control can disguise itself as caution, and now those patterns are becoming impossible to ignore. It's almost like life is holding up a mirror and saying, take a look. Not to shame them, not to punish them, just to help them see. And what they're seeing is creating a profound shift inside of them. Because I don't think this person expected to be affected this deeply. I really don't. I think they believe they understood the situation. I think they believe they understood themselves. But something about this connection has challenged those assumptions. And that's where the Eight of Pentacles starts showing up. Because now I see effort. Not loud effort, not dramatic effort. This is quieter than that. This feels like somebody trying to understand themselves better, trying to improve, trying to figure out why they react the way they do, why certain fears still hold so much power over them, why they keep thinking about someone they thought they could simply move on from emotionally. And honestly, Libra, I feel like they're working on things nobody else can see, internal things, personal things, the kind of growth that doesn't happen overnight. The kind of growth that often happens behind closed doors. Because whoever this person is, they're beginning to realize that the situation wasn't only about losing someone important. It was also about discovering parts of themselves they had neglected for a very long time. And that's creating a level of awareness that feels impossible to reverse. The more they reflect, the more they understand. The more they understand, the harder it becomes to keep pretending. And I keep feeling this energy of somebody standing at the edge of a truth they've been avoiding. Not quite ready to look away anymore. Not quite ready to fully step forward either. Just standing there, watching, thinking, questioning, trying to understand what all of this has been trying to teach them about themselves. And honestly, that's where the energy starts becoming even more revealing. Because the closer somebody gets to the truth, the harder it becomes to ignore what isn't aligned with it. And honestly, Libra, that's exactly what I'm seeing happen here. The Tower is showing up now, and the energy around it feels less like chaos and more like revelation. Like somebody waking up and realizing they've been standing inside a situation that no longer feels right. And I don't think this realization happened all at once. It feels gradual. Small moments, small disappointments. Little observations they brushed aside before but can't seem to dismiss anymore. Because when people begin changing internally, they start seeing their surroundings differently. Conversations that once felt normal suddenly feel draining. Relationships that once felt familiar begin feeling restrictive. Certain people start revealing sides of themselves that were always there, but somehow went unnoticed. And I keep feeling this sense of disappointment. Not because this person hates anyone, not because they're angry at the world, but because they're beginning to understand that some of the people they trusted may not have had their best interests at heart. Okay? And now the Seven of Swords reversed is coming through. Wow, this feels incredibly revealing because I'm seeing masks slipping. I'm seeing truths becoming harder to hide, not only from others, but from themselves. For some of you, this person spent a long time convincing themselves that certain dynamics were acceptable, that certain behaviors were normal, that certain people deserved endless chances. But something has shifted. They're starting to notice patterns. Who's genuinely supportive? Who's only present when they need something? Who's encouraging growth? Who's encouraging fear? And the more they observe, the more uncomfortable some of these realizations become. You know, one thing that keeps standing out to me is that Libra energy naturally values balance, fairness, mutual respect, and I think your presence introduced this person to a healthier perspective than they were accustomed to. Maybe not through grand gestures, maybe not through lectures, just through the way you showed up, the way you listened, the way you treated people, the way you carried yourself. And now they're unconsciously comparing that energy to what exists around them. And the differences are becoming difficult to ignore. Because there are people around this person who benefit from them staying the same. People who are comfortable with old versions of them. People who don't necessarily celebrate growth because growth changes dynamics. Growth changes expectations. Growth changes who has influence. And I feel like your person is beginning to see that. Honestly, some of them are shocked by what they're discovering. Not because these situations appeared overnight, but because they're finally looking at them without excuses, without romanticizing them, without explaining them away. And that's where justice returns. The energy becomes very clear when this card appears, because now the focus isn't on what everybody else is doing. The focus is on accountability, personal accountability. This person is asking themselves difficult questions, questions that don't have easy answers. Why did they tolerate certain things for so long? Why did they allow outside opinions to influence important decisions? Why did they keep choosing situations that left them feeling depleted? And perhaps most importantly, why did they keep creating distance from people who genuinely cared about them? Because that's something I keep picking up very strongly. There is an awareness growing inside of this person that not everybody who challenged them was against them. Not everybody who spoke uncomfortable truths was trying to control them. Some people wanted the best for them. Some people saw their potential. Some people wanted them to heal. And I feel like they're beginning to recognize that you were one of those people, which creates another layer of reflection. Because now they're not only evaluating the people around them, they're reevaluating the connection itself. Looking at it from angles they hadn't considered before. Looking at it without distractions, without interference, without noise. And the more clarity they gain, the harder it becomes to continue living according to expectations that don't actually belong to them. I keep seeing someone standing between two worlds. One world feels familiar but restrictive. The other feels uncertain but authentic. And honestly, Libra, I think they're becoming increasingly aware of which direction their heart keeps pulling them toward. They're just beginning to understand how much of their life has been influenced by voices that were never truly their own. What feels different now is that the noise around them is starting to fade. Not completely, not all at once, but enough for them to finally hear something they've been pushing aside for a very long time. Their own heart. And the moment the King of Cups appears, the entire energy softens. Because beneath all the confusion, all the overthinking, all the pressure they've been carrying, there are emotions here that run much deeper than they've allowed themselves to admit. Honestly, I don't think this person expected you to stay with them emotionally for as long as you did. I think part of them assumed that eventually you would become frustrated, that eventually you would stop understanding, that eventually you would walk away carrying resentment. But that's not what they experienced from you. And that's one of the reasons you keep returning to their thoughts. Not because you're forcing your way into their mind. Not because they're trying to obsess over you. It's because every comparison they make keeps bringing them back to the same realization. There was something different about the way Libra cared. There was something different about the way Libra listened. There was something different about the way Libra showed up. The King of Cups feels almost overwhelmed by that realization, because this person has spent a long time keeping certain emotions contained, locked away, controlled, managed. But emotions have a strange way of resurfacing when they're connected to something meaningful. And now I feel those walls becoming thinner. The distance hasn't erased what they feel. If anything, it has given those feelings room to become clearer. And that's where the Six of Cups enters. Wow, This card feels incredibly personal, because I'm seeing memories, not dramatic memories, not necessarily life-changing events. The small moments, the ordinary moments, the conversations that lasted longer than expected, the laughter that arrived when they needed it most, the moments where they felt understood without having to explain themselves. You know, sometimes people remember how someone looked. Sometimes they remember what someone said. But what this person keeps remembering is how they felt around you. And that's much harder to replace, because emotional safety is rare. Feeling accepted is rare. Feeling seen without judgment is rare. And I keep sensing this energy of them revisiting old interactions and discovering new meaning in them. Things they overlooked at the time suddenly feel important. Things they dismissed suddenly feel significant. And it's creating this wave of nostalgia that seems to arrive unexpectedly. A song, a place, a certain phrase, a random memory appearing out of nowhere. And every time it happens, it pulls them back toward the same emotional space. Toward you, toward the connection, toward everything they haven't fully processed. Okay, and now the star is shining through the reading. And honestly, this feels beautiful, because it doesn't feel dramatic, it feels peaceful, almost healing. Like after all the internal conflict they've been dealing with, they're beginning to understand why your energy affected them so deeply in the first place. For some of you, this person is realizing that what they admired about you wasn't just your kindness. It wasn't just your patience. It wasn't just your beauty or your intelligence. It was the balance you brought into their world, the calm, the steadiness, the sense that things didn't have to be a constant battle. And I think they're recognizing how rare that truly is, especially after seeing other situations more clearly, especially after seeing how exhausting certain dynamics have become. Your energy keeps standing apart, not because you're perfect, not because you never made mistakes, but because there was authenticity there. There was sincerity there. There was a level of emotional honesty that they're only now fully appreciating. And honestly, Libra, I feel like this realization is changing something inside of them. Because once somebody understands that a person wasn't just important, but genuinely meaningful, they stop viewing the connection as something they can simply set aside. They start looking at it differently. They start looking at you differently, and I keep feeling this quiet pull growing stronger. Not loud, not rushed, just persistent. Like a thought they can't shake. Like a feeling they keep returning to no matter how many times they try to focus elsewhere. Because the more they understand what you brought into their life, the more they find themselves wondering what it would look like if they stopped, running from those feelings altogether. A strange thing starts happening when somebody can no longer deny what matters to them. The things that once felt comfortable begin feeling restrictive. The things that once felt familiar begin feeling heavy. And honestly, Libra, that's the energy surrounding this person right now. Because the Death card is moving through this reading, and I don't see them fighting with other people as much as they're fighting with an old version of themselves. A version that learned how to settle. A version that learned how to tolerate situations that weren't truly fulfilling. A version that became so accustomed to surviving that they forgot what it felt like to genuinely live. And lately, that old version feels exhausted. Not physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. There is this growing awareness that certain cycles have reached their limit. Certain conversations have been repeated too many times. Certain disappointments have happened too many times. Certain excuses no longer feel convincing. And I keep hearing this phrase in my head. I can't keep doing this. Not directed toward you. Not directed toward the connection. Directed toward parts of their life that no longer fit who they're becoming. You know, sometimes transformation isn't dramatic. Sometimes it starts with dissatisfaction. That quiet feeling that something isn't right anymore. That feeling of waking up and realizing you're carrying things you don't even want to carry. And honestly, that's where this person seems to be standing. They're looking around at different areas of their life and asking themselves whether these situations still belong in their future. Okay, and Temperance is appearing now. The energy immediately slows down, because after all this internal upheaval, there is a desire for balance, a desire for peace, a desire to stop living in extremes. I think this person is tired of emotional chaos, tired of situations that leave them drained, tired of relationships that require them to become somebody they're not, tired of constantly feeling pulled in different directions. And what's interesting is that the more they seek balance, the more your energy seems to stand out. Not because you're demanding attention, not because you're chasing them. Actually, it's the opposite. Your absence has created space for clarity, space for comparison, space for reflection. And they're beginning to recognize that what they felt around you wasn't pressure. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't instability. There was a sense of calm there, a sense of authenticity there, a sense that they could simply be themselves. And honestly, I think that realization is influencing many of the choices they're currently considering. Because once somebody experiences genuine emotional peace, it's very difficult to keep accepting emotional chaos. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. And now the Eight of Wands is moving into the reading. This card feels different. It feels alive. Like something that has been stuck for a long time is finally beginning to move. Not necessarily outwardly yet, but internally. Decisions are being made, perspectives are shifting, ideas are changing. And I feel like this person is becoming increasingly restless with situations that once kept them comfortable. For some of you, they may be thinking about changing routines, changing environments, changing priorities. There's this feeling of momentum building underneath the surface. Like somebody standing at the edge of a major crossroads. They may not know exactly where they're going yet, but they know they can't remain where they are. And that's a very important realization. Because movement begins long before action becomes visible. Movement begins the moment somebody decides they want something different. The moment they stop accepting what no longer aligns with them. The moment they acknowledge that growth requires change. And I feel like that acknowledgement is becoming stronger every day. Honestly, Libra, what fascinates me about this energy is that the fear is still there. The uncertainty is still there. But something else is becoming stronger than the fear. Curiosity, hope, possibility. The desire to see what happens when they stop choosing comfort over truth. And the more they lean into that feeling, the more I sense doors quietly beginning to open around them. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough for them to start imagining a life that looks very different from the one they've been settling for. There comes a point in every transformation where reflection is no longer enough. A person can spend months thinking, months analyzing, months understanding, but eventually something inside them starts asking a different question. What am I going to do about it? And honestly, Libra, that's the energy stepping forward now. The King of Wands is appearing, and I have to say, this feels very different from where this person started. Because the energy no longer feels passive. It no longer feels like somebody sitting on the sidelines observing life happen around them. This feels like somebody becoming increasingly aware that their choices matter, that their actions matter, that staying silent is still a choice, that standing still is still a decision. And what fascinates me is that this shift didn't happen because somebody forced them. Nobody pushed them into it. Nobody pressured them into it. If anything, it happened because the pressure disappeared. You stopped trying to manage everything. You stopped carrying the emotional responsibility for two people. You stopped trying to create movement where movement wasn't being matched. And in that space, something remarkable happened. They were finally left alone with themselves, alone with their feelings, alone with their truth. And the more they sat with that truth, the more difficult it became to ignore what their heart was actually saying. Because the King of Wands doesn't feel afraid of desire. This energy knows what it wants. The challenge has never been desire. The challenge has been courage. The courage to act. The courage to risk disappointment. The courage to step towards something meaningful without knowing exactly how everything will unfold. And I feel like this person is beginning to understand that avoiding vulnerability hasn't protected them nearly as much as they once believed. Okay, and now the Page of Cups is entering the reading. Honestly, this card feels incredibly sincere. Not perfect, not polished, just sincere. Because I keep sensing somebody wanting to express things they've kept hidden. Thoughts they've never spoken aloud. Feelings they've tried to rationalize away. Questions they've been carrying quietly for a long time. And what stands out is how human this energy feels. They're not showing up as somebody who has all the answers. They're showing up as somebody who's finally willing to be honest. You know, there is a big difference. Because honesty requires vulnerability. Honesty requires admitting that somebody matters. Admitting that their absence affected you. Admitting that their presence changed you. And I think this person is becoming more comfortable with that reality. Not overnight, but gradually. The more they embrace who they're becoming, the less interested they seem in hiding behind old defenses. And Libra, I keep getting this feeling that your calmness played a much bigger role than you realize. Not because it manipulated them, not because it taught them a lesson, but because it created contrast. When you stopped trying to control every outcome, they were forced to confront the outcomes they had been creating themselves. When you started choosing your own balance, they could no longer rely on your energy to compensate for their uncertainty. And that awareness changed something. Because now they're looking at you differently. Not as somebody who will always remain available regardless of circumstances, but as somebody valuable, somebody whose presence genuinely matters. The Ten of Pentacles appears here, and the energy becomes surprisingly grounded. Because what I'm picking up doesn't feel impulsive. It doesn't feel reckless. It doesn't feel like fantasy. This feels like somebody asking themselves deeper questions about stability, about long-term happiness, about what kind of future actually feels meaningful. And it's interesting because those questions seem to keep leading them back toward the same place, the same connection, the same person, the same energy that brought them peace when so many other situations brought confusion. Honestly, Libra, I don't think this journey was ever really about chasing. I think it was about recognition of value, recognition of truth, recognition of what matters once all the distractions fall away. And the more clarity they gain, the harder it becomes to pretend this connection was just another passing chapter. Because what they're feeling now seems less focused on what was lost and more focused on what could still be possible if they finally allowed themselves to move toward it. Before we close this reading, I just want to leave you with one thought. The moment you stopped trying to control the outcome was the moment something inside you became free. And sometimes that's where the real shift begins. Not in the other person, not in the connection, but within you. Because peace has a way of changing everything around it. And I feel like that's exactly what you've been learning. Whatever this person chooses to do with their journey, don't forget how far you've already come with yours. Thank you for allowing me to read for your energy today. I appreciate you more than you know. Take what resonates, leave the rest, and I'll connect with you again very soon. Until then, take care of yourself and keep choosing what brings you back to your own balance. Bye, Libra.